What if I told you that mathematics could actually predict the collapse of our civilization? But what if the very act of reading that prediction changed our fate? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a totally mind-bending paradox, right at the intersection of history, algorithms, and human behavior. We're looking at the math that predicted Doomsday and why it actually failed. Let's get right into it.
So, can math really predict the collapse of civilization? To answer that, let's look at a legendary sci-fi concept that actually inspired real-world science. In Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, there's a mathematician named Hari Seldon who invents a field called psychohistory. Seldon's big realization was this: while you can't possibly predict what one individual will do, if you have a galactic empire of, say, 25 quintillion humans, you can just treat them like gas molecules swirling in a balloon. By applying the rules of statistical mechanics, he could perfectly forecast the fall of the empire and thousands of years of chaos. It's an incredible idea, right? Treating human history as a hard, deterministic science?
But here is the core tension. That thermodynamic assumption, it works beautifully for passive molecules like boiling water. They don't know they're being measured. But history does not equal physics. History is a living system. It's much more like biology or revolution, which never really searches for absolute perfection. It just takes the simplest good enough path. We humans are reactive agents. The moment we hear a forecast about our future, we change our behavior. Despite that, scientists have actually tried to do exactly what Asimov imagined. Around 2010, Peter Turchin pioneered something called cryodynamics, essentially the predictive science of history. By combining dozens of indicators, he mapped out these incredibly predictable secular cycles of political instability in the US spanning centuries. He made the compelling case that historical collapse isn't just random bad luck. It's a measurable, structural buildup of pressure over time. And it's not just an American phenomenon either. Data from France and Western Europe shows these exact same long-term pressures building up into major crises over and over again across totally different eras. Societies coalesce, they overextend, and then they collapse in a highly patterned way. And it's all driven by deep variables, things like inflation and falling real wages.
So, what's the biggest red flag for a society in Turchin's model? It's a concept called elite overproduction. Basically, this happens when a society produces way too many highly educated or wealthy people chasing too few top roles in government, academia, or business. Think about it. When you have a massive influx of people with advanced degrees, but the number of prestigious jobs just stays the same, you create this massive pool of frustrated, aggrieved counter-elites. And historically speaking, this is the exact group that harnesses popular resentment to turn against the established order. Turchin describes this buildup using a brilliant forest fire metaphor. Stagnant wages and that elite overproduction we just talked about act as dead wood accumulating on the forest floor. He even tracked human stature, finding that populations actually shrink physically before revolutions. It's literally a biological fire alarm. So all of this fuel is entirely measurable. But the spark? Maybe it's a self-immolation, maybe a bad election. That spark remains random. We can't predict exactly when the lightning will strike, but the math tells us exactly how much explosive fuel is waiting on the ground. Based on these exact models, Turchin forecast a huge conflagration of instability peaking right in the 2020s. And yeah, we've certainly seen our share of unrest. But halfway through the decade, we have to ask a really fascinating question. If the models perfectly predicted a massive 2020s meltdown, why hasn't systemic collapse completely consumed us yet? Why didn't the math entirely dictate our fate?
The answer lies in Goodhart's law, which states, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to function as a measure. See, the moment leaders and elites see the metric of their own doom, they change the game to avoid it. They saw the overproduction metric and they responded. Think stimulus checks, the shift to remote work, student loan pauses. They redistributed status just enough to fragment that counter-elite tension. In a way, the forecast failed empirically, but it succeeded performatively. That failure actually proves the model's power.
We call this the performative paradox. In Asimov's fictional world, the math only worked because it was kept absolutely secret from the public. Knowing the future broke the math. But reality actually inverts that rule. When modern scientific forecasts are published, they become performative. They actively trigger strategic countermoves from the very people being measured. We don't just read predictions, we react to them.
Let's think about performative prediction in action here. For example, when scientists predicted the Arab Spring based on global food prices, that information didn't just sit in a vacuum. Once a society knows a financial panic or a food shortage is coming, humans hoard cash, they shift markets. We prove time and time again that we are active participants shaping the outcome, not just passive dots on a trend line.
And this brings us to a massive, hidden trap in modern technology, especially artificial intelligence. It's called solipsistic AI. Solipsism is this philosophical idea that only your own mind is sure to exist. So a solipsistic AI acts like the real world is just a stationary, passive rock that doesn't react to being watched. Its cold, calculating eye assumes that humans simply won't change their behavior once the AI is turned on.
Because of this blind spot, these predictive AI models often fail spectacularly. They suffer from 3 fatal flaws. First, exogeneity, assuming the environment is completely independent. Second, stationarity, assuming the data won't shift after the model is deployed. And third, singleton framing, assuming the AI is acting entirely alone. They completely forget that human beings will always adapt, push back, and try to game the algorithm.
All of this creates what researchers call the train, test, deploy gap. An AI might look absolutely perfect in a sterile testing lab, but the second you deploy it into the real world, humans and institutions immediately adapt to it. The very act of modeling human behavior is itself a move in the game, which causes the original prediction to degrade over time. Returning to our sci-fi analogy, in Asimov's universe, his flawless math was finally broken by a single, unpredictable mutant known as the Mule, who completely disrupted the data. But here in reality, every single one of us acts as a mule. If an algorithm predicts a recession, people hoard money and actually cause the recession early. If it predicts a stock winner, voters or markets instantly switch sides. We are all disruptive variables, constantly rewriting the math. So if perfect prediction is impossible in a multi-actor reality, what do we actually build? Well, we have to move away from using data for centralized top-down control. Look at Chicago, for instance. They tested a predictive heat list that flagged youth as future criminals, but that just led to more arrests, a totally self-fulfilling cycle. But then they used that exact same data for the One Summer program, applying an ethics of care with jobs, mentorship, and support. The result? Violence-related arrests dropped by 51%. Data plus investment beats data plus surveillance every single time. Distributed networks adapt and thrive. Brittle hierarchies fail. We have to absolutely reject the idea that we are just passive molecules trapped in some equation of doom. Models like Turchin's are incredibly valuable because they identify the dead wood. They show us where the danger lies, but we don't have to light the match. Asimov needed a hidden second foundation to nudge history, but we can be that foundation publicly, transparently, and adaptively. We can actively steer away from collapse. We are not molecules, we are the mules. We are not helpless passengers here. Our reactions are the steering wheel. We shouldn't be trying to police the future. We should be investing in its probability space. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Cops or jobs? Heat lists or community programs? Which program would you fund to disrupt the algorithm today? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer, and I will see you next time.